Another one of our studies in Ephesians. Today we're going to be looking at Ephesians 6, 10 through 13. Uh, this begins a section of Paul on spiritual warfare. And because I feel like this is particularly relevant to the times in which we live, no matter where we are in the world, spiritual warfare is very real. Uh, I want to take this in three sections. So this is part one of three sections. So we begin today again with Ephesians 6, 10 through 13. Please follow along as I read. Finally, be strong in the Lord and in his mighty power. Put on the full armor of God so that you may take your stand against the devil's schemes. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. Therefore, put on the full armor of God so that when the day of evil comes, you may be able to stand your ground, and after having done everything, to stand. Well, of course, Paul is writing to the Ephesians, and if you remember from the book of Acts, we're told a little bit about the city of Ephesus and some problems actually that Paul had there. One thing, of course, it was the center of the worship of Diana. And there was a massive temple there, one of the wonders of the ancient world, uh, to Diana's honor, and it was really quite an amazing thing. And with that, there was a lot of trade that happened for people, pilgrims coming to worship at that temple, and all the strange things with the worship and so on. And also, it was a big center for magic and the belief in magic. And the book of Acts tells us that when the Christian gospel began to take hold there in Ephesus, that there was a massive burning of books of magic there in Ephesus, and that this represented a great value as far as monetary value. These books being burned, so there was this very strong. Really, Ephesus was a stronghold for demonic type powers and teaching and beliefs and so on. So when you talked about spiritual warfare to the people in Ephesus, they were right there with you. They knew exactly what you were talking about, and would have probably been people who participated in the darker side of those things, and were saved. And so Paul, when he's summing up what he had to say to these folks, gave them this great admonishment to enter into spiritual warfare. So we look at this, and verse 10 tells us, of course, that we're to be strong in the Lord and in his mighty power. That's what Paul needs to remind us. What we need to remind ourselves is it's not about our personality, the strength of our personality. It's not about what tribe or what nation we belong to. That's not what makes us strong. It's not even our families, as wonderful as they might be, but it is that we are strong in the Lord, and that's where it is. And the good thing, he says, and in his mighty power, so that we don't have to depend upon ourselves. Because no matter how strong you are as a person, no matter how much you have going for you, there's times when you just have no strength, or you face a situation that is beyond your strength. And certainly, when we're talking about spiritual warfare, we're out of our league. We're way, kind of a disadvantage compared to our enemy, and we have to have the Lord's power. So he tells them to put on the full armor of God so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. And let me just say this real quickly about taking our stand, because we're going to come back to this idea of standing several times in this passage. A lot of times, the way the world presents things, Christians are supposed to be these gentle, toothless, humdrum kind of people who, because we love God, we will go along with anything, or we're there to comfort people at all times. Of course, we're supposed to do those things. We're supposed to comfort. We're supposed to be compassionate. Those are things that we do as believers. But they also think that we should then accept sin in all its forms. I've had recently some back and forth with some people who said if I was a Christian, I would accept their lifestyle, which was totally against what the Bible teaches. It's absolutely deeply in sin and is evil. And that's not at all what Christianity stands for. That we have to stand against certain things. And we just can't just, say, well, you live your way, I'll live my way kind of stuff. That's not at all what Paul says here and what the Bible teaches. Put on the full armor of God so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. He says, put on the whole armor. The word he uses out of Greek is panopleans. I think I'm saying that right. And the English word panoply comes out of that. It means a total covering, that the whole armor of God is meant to cover us. And we'll see in a few, as we go through the study, from head to toe, that we're to be totally covered by the whole armor of God. There's not supposed to be any part of us that is exposed, if you will, to the outside. You see some of that just the eyes are basically showing some of these guys, like this guy over here. I'm trying to get him right there. Just his eyes are showing. He's got the shield, he's got the helmet and all that kind of thing, because he's going to face the enemy face to face, and he needs to be covered. We need to be covered when we face the devil. And it says against the devil's schemes. That schemata is the word. And scheme, that means the total plans, the total strategy. Like you would, if you're going into battle, you say, well, these guys will go in on this side, these will flank on this side, and then these guys will come in with a cavalry on this side, so on and so forth. The devil plans out his attacks, and we need to be aware of that they are intelligently done, and they're aimed at us. We are the target. So let's go on. He says, and Paul says, our struggle is not against flesh and blood. Now, we have the personalities that we see people who are getting in the devil's service, but he's saying, look beyond the people and see what it is. It's against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of the dark world, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. And when Paul was saying these things, he was using terms that talked about different levels in the devil's kingdom, in the demonic kingdom. And each one of these represent ruler is a level, authorities is a level, the powers in the dark world is a level, and spiritual forces. And so he's saying there is in the devil's kingdom a hierarchy, just like there is among our military today. There's a hierarchy of ranks and so on, and different ones have different responsibility for different types of warfare. For example, in modern warfare, we have tanks, we have the infantry, we have the air forces, the helicopters, and all that kind of thing. And he's saying the devil's, this is very sophisticated when we're dealing with the devil and evil. That there are levels of that, and that when we go into battle, we're not just facing this little guy over here. There's a whole realm of things out there that we're facing, and sometimes we don't even realize it. And that's why it's so complex. Sometimes we wonder why Christianity still struggles against things. Well, the devil's very well organized, and he's entrenched. He's entrenched, and we have to pry him out of his places. And unfortunately, in our day and age, more people are seen to be on the devil's side than were in years past, at least in Western society. And so we have to go after him. And when we go after him, don't you know that he calls in the reinforcements? He comes back after us. We shouldn't be surprised about that. We shouldn't be surprised the devil's fighting back. He knows he's going to lose the war. But you look at Nazi Germany during the Second World War. Even though they knew they had lost the war, they kept fighting to the very end. And that's exactly how the devil's going to behave. He's going to keep fighting to the very end, taking as many people with him as he can. Because why? Because he is evil. Now he talks about in this too that our struggle in the King James it says for we wrestle, and actually that's more accurate than struggle, because it is an athletic term which means wrestle, and that means we are grappling, like hand to hand. You look at these again, soldiers behind me in the background, and they were not fighting from a distance. When those spears came, in contact with the enemy, they're only a few feet away. They're very, very close, maybe a meter at most. And then they drew in closer. And this was life and death, face to face. And when we face the devil, listen, it's not from a distance. We're not pushing a button somewhere, have a drone flying overhead and dropping bombs and so on. We are face to face with the enemy. And we're going to have that kind of struggle that is that intimate and that close. And we're going to look the devil right in the eye, and we're going to have to fight him. So Paul says that to them. He talks about them, the heavenly realms. And that speaks about the fact that that this goes into a world beyond our own. It is not just what you see in this world. It is high up. And remember that the devil's been at war with the Lord God for centuries and centuries and thousands of years. And it goes on, it's been going on, it's not going to stop. But then he goes on to say, therefore, put on the whole armor of God, so that when the evil day comes, you may be able to stand your ground. And after you have done everything, to stand. So he's saying this, stand, 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 because we have to do that. We have to resist with everything that we have, and having done all to resist successfully. Now, I also have this picture behind you because it gives you an idea of the Roman phalanx. And that idea is all these shields were meant to fit together, and they all attacked so that one shield was overlapping with the other and so on, because of that unity that they needed. And they were able to resist better because of the way that all interlocked. And the same thing for us. When we fight with each other on our side. And if one falls, then we're weakened. All of us are weakened. And so we need to do that in unity, but also to know that if we don't stand, we're going to affect the person next to us, this side or that side. We're going to affect them because we have not stood, and we are endangering the whole thing. So I just want to give a quick illustration of history. I love history. And some of you will know in the World War II that Nazi Germany did one last push in the West to try to push the Allies back and take back Europe. And that was what we know as the Battle of the Bulge. And the Battle of the Bulge, the Germans overwhelmed the Allies with this massive attack when all the conditions were favoring them, and it looked like they were going to win. But there was this one French town called, I think maybe Belgium town, Bastogne. And Bastogne was a crossroads. It was very important, and the Germans knew they had to capture that town. But there were some soldiers there who very weakly defended at first, but then the 101st Airborne Division came in there and strengthened it. And for days and days and days, the Germans concentrated their attack on Bastogne. They had to take that crossroads. Otherwise, their whole attack was going to fall apart. They surrounded it, and they pushed, and they came as strongly as they could, trying to destroy the American soldiers who were fighting in there. And yet the American soldiers hung on tenaciously, and they were dying, and they're wounded. Even the wounded were going back and fighting because they knew they had to hold that crossroads. They knew they had to take their stand there and keep the enemy from taking that key place. And my friends, and they were successful, by the way. The Germans never did take it. And it was such a problem that led to them losing the Battle of the Bulge and then being pushed back and eventually being defeated by the Allies. And of course, the Russians on the other side. But the point I'm trying to say is sometimes when we're surrounded by the enemy and the enemy is attacking as strongly as the enemy can, we think we're going to be overwhelmed, and we think, oh, we're just going to have to retreat. We have to retreat. We have to retreat. But there are times when we have to stand, to stand, to stand, to stand, and trust God to give us the ability to fight, even though the enemy seems to be overwhelming us. And that is exactly what I want to challenge you for. If you're not fighting now, you're going to be fighting at some point. You're going to be fighting, and you're going to think it'd be easier to retreat. But take your stand, especially if you know you're standing rightly for the Lord. Stand and hold and resist, and believe that God will give you the power to overcome and to win the battle.